Can a lone barbarian stand against a sorcerer's army that could crush an entire kingdom? What dark power lurks behind the shadow of the Black Colossus? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's story is Black Colossus by Robert E. Howard, a classic story reimagined and retold for the modern age. Only the age-old silence lingered over the ruins of Kuthchemes, but fear thrummed in the chest of Shevatis, the thief. His breath came fast, harsh against his clenched teeth, as he faced the desolate monuments that towered like the bones of a forgotten world. He was the single pulse of life in a vast graveyard of stone. Not a bird dared to circle above. The sun blazed down on the emptiness, scorching the ruins beneath a limitless, merciless sky. All around him, remnants of a civilization long erased clawed at the heavens. Fractured pillars jutted jaggedly, crumbling walls whispered of ancient wars, and colossal statues, scarred by wind and sand, bore twisted, half-erased faces that hinted at horrors beyond imagination. From horizon to horizon, nothing stirred. Only the endless desert stretched, interrupted by the dry skeleton of a riverbed. Amid that barren expanse, the ruins gleamed like the jagged teeth of some fallen beast, and above all rose the ivory dome, dominating the landscape, its sheer presence sending a shiver down Shevatis' spine. The dome rested on a pedestal of gleaming marble, rising from what had once been a terraced bank of a nameless river. Broad steps led to a massive bronze door, set like the entrance to a god's tomb. The ivory surface of the dome shimmered as if it were polished by unseen hands. Its golden pinnacle sparkled under the sun, while a circle of enormous, untranslatable hieroglyphs coiled around its curve. Shevatis couldn't read them, but the ancient symbols stirred something dark and primal in his mind. He came from a lineage steeped in myths older than most living tribes could imagine, and even he felt the weight of dread. Shevatis was lithe and wiry, a master thief of Zamora, built for stealth and cunning. His head was shaven, his body wrapped only in a scarlet silk loincloth. His skin was dark, his sharp, narrow face dominated by piercing black eyes. Fingers long and delicate, as quick and restless as moth wings, hovered near the jeweled hilt of his short sword, sheathed in ornate leather. He handled the weapon with almost ritualistic care, flinching as the sheath brushed his bare thigh. His caution was not for show. This was Shevatis, the thief whose name whispered through the shadows beneath the temples of Bel, a figure immortalized in dark songs and whispered legends. And yet, despite all his bravado, fear gnawed at him here, at the foot of the ivory dome. It radiated an unnatural aura. Millennia of wind, sun, and sand had lashed these ruins, yet the ivory and gold gleamed as if untouched since the day it was raised by unknown hands. The dome's strange perfection fit the haunted nature of this place. The desert stretched southeast of Shem, a mysterious wasteland. A few days' ride southwest would bring one to the great bend of the river Styx, where its waters turned west, flowing toward the distant sea. Beyond that bend lay Stygia, dark and brooding, its life-giving river carving sheer valleys from the desert sands. And here, in the shadow of Kuthchemes, Shevatis trembled, standing on the edge of a forgotten age, facing a power he could barely imagine. To the east, the desert faded into endless steppes, stretching toward the barbaric splendor of Tehran and the great inland sea. Northward, the barren sands gave way to jagged hills, beyond which lay the fertile uplands of Koth, the southernmost realm of the Hyborian tribes. To the west, the desert blended into the sweeping meadowlands of Shem, reaching all the way to the distant ocean. Shevatis knew it all instinctively, as a man knows the streets of his hometown. A seasoned traveler, a master thief, he had looted kingdoms and skirted death countless times, but now he paused, trembling before an adventure greater and a treasure mightier than any he had ever dared to pursue. Within the ivory dome rested the bones of Thugra Khotan, the dark sorcerer who had ruled Kuthchemes 3,000 years past. In his time, the kingdoms of Stygia had stretched far beyond the river, spilling into the meadows of Shem and the distant uplands. Then, from the northern cradle of the Hyborian race, barbarian hordes surged southward, carving kingdoms from the earth with iron and blood. Under Thugra Khotan's reign, they had swept over Kuthchemes like a tidal wave, drowning marble towers in fire and carnage. Yet the sorcerer was cunning. In the final hours, he swallowed a terrible, unknown poison, and his masked priests entombed him in the sepulchre he had designed himself. His devoted followers perished in a crimson holocaust around the tomb, and though the barbarians tried, no force, maul, fire, or steel could breach its doors. Eventually they rode away, leaving the city in ruins. Thugra Khotan lay undisturbed, his bones encased it within the ivory dome, while lizards gnawed at the crumbling pillars, and the river that once fed the city disappeared into the desert sands. Legends whispered of the treasures piled upon the sorcerer's bones. Many a thief had sought them, and many had perished at the tomb's threshold, victims of traps, curses, or monstrous dreams that drove them to madness. So Shevatis shivered, not only for the fabled serpent said to guard the sorcerer's remains, but for the weight of centuries of horror. The ruins around him bore silent witness to the terror, the remnants of a grand hall where hundreds of captives had knelt during Thugra Khotan's gruesome festivals, their heads claimed by the serpent god Set. Every shattered column, every fallen block of stone whispered of death, of cruelty, and of a power that even time could not diminish. Shevatis stood at the edge of it all, the lone shadow facing the tomb of a godlike sorcerer, where treasure and terror lay entwined in eternal sleep. Nearby yawned the pit of horrors, a shadowed chasm where screaming victims had once been fed to a nameless, writhing monstrosity emerging from deeper, infernal caverns. Legends made Thugra Khotan more than human. Even now, a degraded cult of worshippers lingered, stamping his likeness on coins to guide their dead across the river of darkness, whose Styx was only the material echo. Shevatis had seen those coins, stolen from beneath the tongues of corpses, and the sorcerer's staring visage had etched itself indelibly into his memory. But fear was a luxury he could not afford. Setting it aside, he approached the bronze door, its polished surface betraying no bolt, no catch, no hint of weakness. Not in vain had he infiltrated forbidden cults, listened to the grim whispers of Skalos's midnight devotees, and pored over the iron-bound grimoires of Vathamos the Blind. Kneeling, Shevatis traced the threshold with his nimble fingers, finding projections too fine to see, too subtle for the unskilled. He pressed them with deliberate care, murmuring a long-forgotten incantation under his breath. At the last touch, he sprang upright, striking the door's exact center with the flat of his hand. There was no squeak of hinge or spring. The door simply vanished inward, sliding silently into place at the far end, revealing a narrow corridor of ivory. From a side opening, a silent horror slithered forth, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light fixed on the intruder, a serpent 20 feet long, its scales shimmering with an eerie, iridescent glow. Shevatis wasted no thought on the dark pits below the dome that might have fed such a beast. He drew his sword carefully, its blade dripped with green venom, the same poison as that which frothed from the fiend's fangs. Harvesting that venom from the fiend-haunted swamps of Zingara had been a tale in itself, yet now it was his lifeline. Every step Shevatis took was deliberate, balanced on the balls of his feet, knees bent, ready to spring in an instant. And yet even his speed, honed by years of thievery and danger, was tested when the serpent struck. Its neck arched and lashed with lightning precision, a blur of lethal intent. There was barely time to react. Shevatis lunged, sword extended, eyes shut, a cry tearing from his throat. The serpent struck, wrenching the blade from his grasp as the corridor erupted into a chaos of thrashing, hissing, and lashing. Every nerve in his body screamed as he fought to survive the living nightmare that guarded the tomb of Thugra-Khotan. When Shevatis opened his eyes, disbelief froze him. He was alive. Before him the serpent writhed and twisted, its colossal jaws pinned by the blade he had blindly thrust forward. Chance, sheer luck had spared him. Moments later, the serpent sank into glistening coils, motionless at last, poisoned by the blade's deadly venom. Cautiously, he stepped over the defeated beast and pressed against the door again. This time, it slid aside smoothly, revealing the interior of the dome. Shevatis gasped. Crimson light flooded the chamber, pulsing and throbbing, almost too intense for mortal eyes. It radiated from a gigantic red jewel set high in the vaulted arch above. Before him lay a treasure beyond reckoning. Mountains of diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, turquoises, opals, towers of jade, jet, and lapis lazuli, pyramids of gold, stacks of silver ingots, jeweled encrusted swords in cloth of gold sheaths, helmets with plumes of black, scarlet, and colored horsehair, silver-scaled armor, gem-studded harnesses once worn by warrior kings long entombed, goblets carved from single gems, skulls plated in gold with moonstone eyes, necklaces of human teeth set with jewels. The ivory floor was carpeted inches deep in gold dust, sparkling under the red glow like a million tiny stars. Shevatis stood in a wonderland of magic and grandeur, treading a galaxy of treasure beneath his sandaled feet. Yet his gaze was fixed on the crystal dais at the center, directly beneath the red jewel. There lay the remains of Thugra-Khotan, the centuries-old sorcerer, his bones crumbling into dust. Terror gripped Shevatis in a wave that drained the blood from his face. His spine stiffened, skin crawling, lips moving silently, until a scream tore from his throat, echoing hideously under the arching dome. Then, as suddenly, the silence of ages reclaimed Kuthchemes, leaving the ruins to their timeless watch. Far away, rumors began to stir. They drifted across the meadowlands, through Hyborian cities, along camel caravan trails guided by lean, hawk-eyed men in white caftans. Hook-nosed herdsmen carried the whispers across the grasslands. In tents, stone villages, and stately cities by blue lakes and rivers, the story traveled, along white roads teeming with ox-wains, herds, merchants, knights, archers, and priests. Everywhere, the tale of the crimson-lit dome, the treasure, and the sorcerer's bones spread, seeding awe and dread across the Hyborian world.
The whispers came from the desert east of Stygia, far south of the Kothian hills. A new prophet had risen among the nomads. Tribes spoke of war, of vultures gathering in the southeast, and a terrifying leader who marshaled growing hordes toward conquest. The Stygians, always a menace to the northern lands, were not part of this movement. Their armies massed along eastern borders, and priests wove countermagic against the desert sorcerer, called Natok, the Veiled One, whose face no man had ever seen. Yet the tides surged northwest. Blue-bearded kings fell before the altars of their pot-bellied gods. Squat-walled cities were drenched in blood. Rumor held that Natok's goal lay in the uplands of the Hyborians. 30 nomadic tribes, 15 fortified cities, and even a rebellious Stygian prince had joined his ranks, lending the movement the weight of true war. Most Hyborian nations, as ever, ignored the threat, except for Khoraja. Carved from Shemite lands by Kothic adventurers, it lay southeast of Koth and would bear the brunt of the invasion. Its young king languished a captive of the treacherous ruler of Ophir, who vacillated between restoring him for ransom or surrendering him to Koth, which offered no gold, only political advantage. In the meantime, the kingdom's fate rested in the hands of the king's sister, young Princess Yasmela. Minstrels sang of her beauty throughout the western lands, of her grace and pride. But that night, all her pride fell away like a discarded cloak. In her chamber, its ceiling a dome of lapis lazuli, its marble floors littered with rare furs, walls decorated with golden friezes, 10 noble daughters slept upon velvet couches around her golden silken canopy. Yasmela herself did not rest upon her bed. She lay naked, prone upon the marble floor, her dark hair spilling across pale shoulders, fingers twisted in despair. Terror had seized her, freezing blood in her lithe limbs, dilating her wide, fearful eyes, sending gooseflesh crawling along her spine. She writhed in helpless horror, the pulse of pure fear radiating from her every motion. Above her, in the deepest shadow of the chamber, something lurked. Not flesh, not bone, but a shapeless, night-born darkness, a monstrous incubus born of nightmares. It hovered, amorphous, almost invisible, yet from its void-like form glimmered 2 points of blazing yellow fire, twin eyes that burned with a cruel, intelligent malevolence. And in that instant, Princess Yasmela knew she faced something older and far more terrible than any mortal army, a horror that had waited, patient and hungry, for the perfect moment. A voice issued from the shadow, a low, sibilant hiss, more serpent than human. It slithered through the chamber air, carrying a vile, otherworldly cadence that made Yasmela shiver uncontrollably. The words sank into her mind like poison, twisting her thoughts, and she writhed on the marble floor, trying in vain to escape the insidious horror. "You are marked for me, princess," the whisper hissed, dripping with malice and desire. "Long before you were born, I had singled you out, yearning for you, yet held fast by the ancient spells that shielded me from my enemies. I am Natok, the Veiled One. Gaze upon me, princess. Soon you will see me in my true form, and you will love me." The hissing dwindled into cruel, lascivious laughter. Yasmela beat her fists against the cold tiles, each strike a futile attempt to drive away the terror that seized her. "I sleep in the palace of Akbatana. My body lies in its frame of flesh and bones, but the spirit is free, wandering these nights. Were you to see the desert from that palace window, you would know the futility of resistance. The sands bloom with fire and steel, hundreds of thousands of warriors at my command. Like an avalanche, I will sweep into the lands of my ancient enemies. Kings will furnish me skulls for goblets. Their women and children will serve my servants' servants. I have grown mighty in the long years of dreaming. But you, princess, you shall be my queen. I will teach you the forgotten ways of pleasure. The words dissolved into a flood of cosmic obscenity. Yasmela shrank beneath their weight, as if lashes of unseen whips tore across her bare flesh. "Remember," the shadow hissed, "soon, very soon, I will claim what is mine." Yasmela pressed her face to the tiles, fingers plugging her pink ears, yet she heard another sound, a sweeping noise like the wings of 1,000 bats. Fear forced her eyes upward, but all she saw was moonlight spilling through the window, a silver blade of light where the phantom had lingered. Trembling, she staggered to a satin couch and collapsed, weeping. Around her, the noble girls slept on, undisturbed, until one stirred, blinking in confusion. She knelt beside Yasmela, arms wrapping around her trembling waist. Was it? She whispered, eyes wide with terror. "Oh, Vatisa," Yasmela gasped, clutching her convulsively. "It came again. I saw it. I heard it speak. It spoke its name, Natok. It is Natok. It is not a nightmare. It towered over me while the girls slept as if drugged. What shall I do?"
Vatisa twisted a golden bracelet around her slender arm, her movements slow and thoughtful. "Oh, princess," she said, voice low and urgent, "no mortal power can confront it. The charm the priests of Ishtar gave you is useless. You must seek the forgotten oracle of Mitra." Yasmela shivered despite herself. Gods of yesterday often became the devils of tomorrow. She recalled that the Kothians had long abandoned the worship of Mitra, and though she knew little of the deity, she sensed its ancient and terrible power. Ishtar, the other gods of Koth, none could be trusted lightly. The culture and religion of Koth had been shaped by a tangled mix of Shemite and Stygian influences, and what remained of the Hyborian faith now carried the weight of decadence, luxury, and hidden tyranny. "Will Mitra aid me?" Yasmela asked, gripping Vatisa's wrist, desperation shining in her eyes. "We have worshipped Ishtar so long." "He will," Vatisa replied firmly. She was the daughter of an Ophirian priest who had fled to Khoraja, bringing with him the rights of his homeland. "We must seek the shrine. I will go with you." "I will," Yasmela whispered, rising, but she paused when Vatisa moved to dress her. "It is not fitting to present myself clothed. I will go naked, on my knees, as a true suppliant. Mitra must see humility." "Nonsense," Vatisa scolded, with little patience for ritualized superstition. "Mitra wants you upright, not crawling like a worm or spilling animal blood across his altars." Grudgingly, Yasmela allowed herself to be dressed. Vatisa slid a light silken shirt over her shoulders, followed by a soft silken tunic cinched with a wide velvet sash at the waist. Satin slippers adorned her feet, and a few deft fingers arranged her dark, wavy hair. The girls moved silently, drawing aside a heavy tapestry studded with gilt-work. Vatisa lifted the golden bolt, revealing a narrow, winding corridor. Hand in hand, they advanced, slipping through another door into a broad hallway. There, a guardsman in crested gilt helmet, silvered cuirass, and gold-chased greaves held a long-shafted battle-axe. A subtle motion from Yasmela stopped his exclamation. He saluted and fell silent, as motionless as a statue. The two girls traversed the hall, vast and eerie under the flickering cressets mounted high along the walls. They descended a stairway where shadows clung to every corner, blotting the walls with darkness. 3 levels down, they reached a narrow corridor whose arched ceiling glittered with embedded jewels, the crystal floor sparkling beneath their feet, and walls adorned with golden friezes. Hand in hand, hearts pounding, they stole along the corridor, until at last they came to a wide portal of gilded magnificence, a door that promised the next step in their perilous journey. Vatisa pushed open the door, revealing a shrine forgotten by nearly all, preserved only for the royal visitors of Khoraja's court. Though Yasmela had grown up within the palace, she had never entered this sacred place. Unlike the lavish, ornate temples of Ishtar, the shrine's simplicity radiated a quiet dignity, a beauty both austere and profound, reflecting the essence of the Mitran faith. The ceiling soared above them, plain white marble as were the walls and floor. A narrow golden frieze traced the walls. Behind an altar of clear green jade, unstained by sacrifice, stood the pedestal holding the material representation of Mitra. Yasmela gazed in awe at the sweeping shoulders, the strong, serene features, the wide, unwavering eyes, the patriarchal beard, and the thick curls held by a simple band across the temples.
She did not know it, but this was art at its peak, pure, free, unburdened by the symbols or dogmas that confined lesser works. Overcome, she sank to her knees, then prostrated herself upon the marble floor. Vitisa, cautious yet reverent, mirrored her posture. Even so, she whispered softly into Yasmela's ear, "This is but a symbol, princess. No mortal can claim to know Mitra's true form. This representation captures perfection as the human mind can conceive it. He does not dwell within the stone, as Ishtar is said to. He is everywhere, above, around, and among the stars. Here only is a focus of his being. Call upon him." Yasmela's voice trembled. "What shall I say?" "Before you can speak, Mitra already knows the contents of your mind," Vitisa murmured. Before the words had fully left her lips, a deep, sonorous voice filled the air, not from the image, but from the chamber itself. Musical and calm, yet commanding, it rolled over them like waves along a golden shore. "Speak not, my daughter, for I know your need. There is one way to save your kingdom, and in saving it to protect the world from the serpent risen from the darkness of ages. Go forth into the streets alone. Place your kingdom in the hands of the first man you meet." The sound faded, leaving a profound silence. The girls stared at one another, hearts racing. Rising, they stole silently back to Yasmela's chamber. Outside, the city lay in slumber. The moon had set. Midnight had long passed. The revelry in gardens and on rooftops had faded. Khoraja lay quiet under the stars, whose reflection danced in the cressets scattered among the city, twinkling across flat roofs and tranquil streets.
"What will you do?" Vitisa whispered, trembling. "Give me my cloak," Yasmela replied, teeth set with determination. "But alone, in the streets, at this hour?" Vitisa protested. "Mitra has spoken," the princess said firmly. "Whether the voice was truly the gods or a trick of a priest, it matters not. I will go." Wrapping herself in a voluminous silk cloak, Yasmela drew a velvet cap over her head, its filmy veil trailing like a shadow. She hurried through the palace corridors and reached a bronze door where a dozen spearmen paused, staring as she slipped past. This wing opened directly onto the street. Elsewhere, the palace was enclosed by high walls and broad gardens. She stepped into the street, lit by the steady glow of cressets spaced at intervals. Her heart thudded. For the first time, the aristocratic daughter wandered alone outside her ancestral palace. She paused, shivering, then closed the door behind her. The street stretched silent and bare. Satin-slippered feet kissed the paving stones, and each soft step made her pulse leap, imagining echoes roaring through hidden alleys, stirring ragged, rat-eyed figures from the shadows below. Every darkness seemed alive, every doorway a potential lair of unseen danger. A sudden movement ahead made her start violently. A figure emerged in the dim light. She melted into a clump of shadows, her pulse hammering. But the man did not move cautiously, nor timidly as a thief or frightened traveler might. He strode with the ease of one who had no need to be quiet. His steps fell on the stone with the confidence of command, his presence dominating the night. As he passed a cresset, its torchlight revealed him clearly. A tall man in chain-mail hauberk, the polished blue steel of his greaves and bassinet glinting faintly. Yasmela held her cloak tightly, bracing herself, then stepped boldly from the shadows. "Saha!" His sword flashed half from its sheath, stopping abruptly when he realized it was only a woman before him. His quick gaze swept the shadows, searching for unseen allies. He faced her now, hand resting on the long hilt jutting from beneath his flowing scarlet cloak. Torchlight glinted in his eyes, revealing a cold, bluish fire that spoke of lethal skill. She realized instantly he was no Kothian, no Hyborian. A mercenary captain, seasoned by distant lands, barbaric and civilized alike, walked before her, and in his silent command, danger radiated like heat from a forge.
There was a raw, wolfish quality to this warrior that marked him as a true barbarian. No civilized man, no matter how wild or corrupt, could match the fire blazing in his eyes. Wine lingered on his breath, but he neither staggered nor faltered. "Have they shut you out into the street?" he asked in rough Kothic, reaching for her. His fingers closed lightly around her wrist, yet she felt the strength behind them, enough to splinter bone without effort. "I've just come from the last wine shop still open," he continued, his voice rough but amused. "Ishtar's curse on these soft-livered reformers who shut the grog houses. Let men sleep, not drink, they say, so they can serve their masters better. Soft-gutted eunuchs. In Corinthia, where I served with the mercenaries, we drank and wenched all night and fought till blood ran in the channels of our swords. But what of you, my girl? Take off that cursed mask." She twisted lithely, avoiding his grasp without seeming to resist, all the while aware of her danger. Alone with a drunken barbarian, she had no way of knowing whether he would mock her, take offense, or even strike. Barbaric men were unpredictable. A creeping fear clawed at her heart. "Not here," she said, laughing lightly. "Come with me." "Where?" His wild blood flared, yet he moved cautiously, like a wolf sizing prey. "Are you leading me to some den of robbers?" "No, no, I swear it," she protested, fending off his hands that sought her veil. "Devil take you, hussy," he growled, irritation mixing with curiosity. "You're as sly as a Hyrcanian woman with your damned veil. Let me see at least your figure." Before she could intervene, he wrenched the cloak from her shoulders. Yasmela felt his breath hiss through clenched teeth as he inspected her. Suspicion flickered in his eyes, sharp and wary. "Who in the devil are you?" he muttered. "You're no street waif, unless your lover stole the king's seraglio for these clothes." "Never mind that," she said, daringly placing her hand on his massive iron-clad arm. "Come with me, off the street." He hesitated, then accepted, apparently, her explanation. He saw that he half believed her a noblewoman, weary of polite suitors, seeking a secret thrill. He allowed her to recover her cloak, and together they moved down the street. Every step revealed the brutal perfection of him, muscles corded beneath the mail, each movement tigerish, elemental, untamed. Compared to the courtiers and polished gentlemen of her world, he was alien, wild as the jungle itself. She feared him. She told herself she loathed his raw strength, his unashamed barbarism. And yet, something primal stirred deep within her, a breathless, dangerous fascination. The memory of his firm hand on her arm made her pulse leap. In that fleeting touch, a chord in her soul had been struck, awakening something forbidden, exhilarating, and utterly irresistible.
Many men had knelt before Yasmela in her life, yet here was one who had never knelt for anyone. He was raw, untamed, like a caged tiger she was leading through her halls. Fear and fascination coiled together in her chest as she guided him. She paused at the palace door, pressing lightly against it, eyes flicking to the mercenary. He showed no suspicion, only that quiet, coiled strength that made her pulse leap. "Palace, eh?" he rumbled, voice like gravel. "So, you're a maid in waiting." A strange, prickling jealousy rose in her. Had any of her maids ever led this war eagle into her private chambers? The guards gave no sign as she passed, but he scanned them like a fierce dog evaluating a foreign pack. She ushered him through a curtained doorway into an inner chamber. He glanced around naively at the tapestries until his eyes fell on a crystal jar of wine resting on an ebony table. With a satisfied sigh, he tilted it toward his lips. Vatisa burst from an adjoining room, breathless. "Oh, my princess!" "Princess!" The jar hit the floor with a crash. In the same instant, the mercenary snatched Yasmela's veil away, his gaze flashing with sudden feral intensity. His sword leapt into his hand in a blur of blue steel. His eyes blazed like a trapped tiger, every muscle taut.
The air thrummed with tension, heavy as the calm before a storm. Vetisa sank to the floor, paralyzed by terror. Yasmela met the barbarian's furious stare without flinching. She understood her life hung by a thread. One wrong move, one panic-fueled reaction, and it could end in blood. And yet, amid the terror, a thrilling exhilaration surged through her. "Do not be afraid," she said, steadying her voice. "I am Yasmela, but you have no reason to fear me." "Why lead me here?" he snarled, eyes darting across the chamber. "What trick is this?" "There is no trickery," she replied, meeting his fiery gaze. "I came because you can help me. I called on the gods, Mitra, and he bade me seek aid from the first man I met in the streets." He understood oracles and portents. Slowly he lowered the sword, though he kept it close, ready. "Well," he grunted, "if you're Yasmela and you need help, your kingdom's in a devil's of a mess. But how can I aid you? Unless you want a throat cut, of course." "Sit," she commanded. "Vetisa, bring him wine." He obeyed, careful to place his back against a solid wall, eyes sweeping the room like a predator. He rested the naked sword across his mail-clad knees. Yasmela watched, fascinated and a little breathless. That blue steel seemed to whisper stories of blood and conquest. She could hardly imagine lifting it, yet he wielded it effortlessly with one hand. She studied the breadth of his hands, the strength in every finger. A sudden guilty thrill passed through her as she imagined those strong fingers entwined in her dark hair. Conan seemed to relax when Yasmela sank onto a satin divan opposite him. He removed his bassinet and laid it on the table, drawing back his coif so that the folds of mail draped over his massive shoulders. Now she could see him more clearly. Unlike any Hyborian she had known, his dark, scarred face carried a hint of moodiness, a latent menace that was not outright evil, but undeniably dangerous. His piercing blue eyes smoldered, and a broad, low forehead was framed by a raven-black mane, tousled and square-cut. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of curiosity inside her. "Conan," he replied, draining the wine in one long gulp and offering the cup for more. "A captain of the mercenary spearmen, born in Cimmeria." The name stirred only a vague notion in her mind, a grim, wild northern land beyond the reach of the Hyborian kingdoms, where fierce, brooding warriors thrived. She had never met one before. Resting her chin on her hands, she studied him with the dark, searching gaze that had made many a heart surrender. "Conan of Cimmeria," she said softly. "You said I needed aid. Why?" His reply was blunt, unpolished, yet unmistakably honest. "Any man can see it. Your brother, the king, sits in an Ophirian prison. Koth schemes to enslave you. That sorcerer Natok rages across Shem with fire and death. And worse, your soldiers are deserting day by day." For a moment she said nothing. The directness of his words was new, foreign, yet invigorating. "Why are they deserting?" she asked, curiosity sharpening into concern. "Some are bought by Koth. Many believe Khoraja is doomed, and many are terrified of this Natok fellow." "Will your mercenaries remain loyal?" she asked, tension tightening her chest. "As long as you pay them," he answered with practical candor. "Politics don't interest us. You can trust Amorik, our general, but the rest of us? Common men, lovers of coin and plunder. If Ophir's ransom bankrupts you, some might turn to Koth or loot the city themselves. Civil wars are good for loot." "Why wouldn't you join Natok?" she asked sharply. "What could he pay us?" he snorted, amused. "Brass idols and fat-bellied gods stolen from Shemite cities? As long as you fight him, we're on your side." "Would your comrades follow you?" she pressed, eyes steady on his. "Follow me where?" "I mean that I intend to make you commander of the armies of Khoraja." He froze mid-sip, the goblet hovering in his hand before a broad grin spread across his face. His eyes sparkled with a new, fierce light. "Commander, Chrome, and what will your perfumed nobles say?" "They will obey me," she declared, clapping her hands sharply. A slave hurried in, bowing deeply. "Send Count Thespides, the Chancellor Taurus, Lord Amalek, and Aga Shupras."
"I place my trust in Mitra," Yasmela said, her dark gaze fixed firmly on Conan. He barely looked up, devouring the food Vatisa tremulously set before him. "You have seen much war?" she asked. "I was born in the midst of battle," he said, tearing a huge chunk of meat from a joint with his bare teeth. "The first sounds I heard were swords clanging and men screaming. Blood feuds, tribal wars, imperial campaigns. I fought them all." "But can you lead men, arrange battle lines?" she pressed. Conan shrugged, utterly unconcerned. "I can try. It's no more than swordplay on a larger scale. You draw his guard, then stab, slash. Either his head is off or yours." At that moment, a slave entered, announcing the arrival of the summoned nobles. Yasmela drew the velvet curtains and stepped into the outer chamber. The men bent their knees in surprise at her summons at such an hour. "I have called you here to announce my decision," she began. "The kingdom is in peril." "Right enough, my princess," Count Thespides said, a tall man with curled black locks scented with oils. One white hand smoothed his pointed mustache, while the other held a velvet chaperon with a scarlet feather. His gold-embroidered velvet coat hardie looked exquisite, yet the strength beneath was undeniable. "Perhaps Ophir should be offered more gold for the king's release." "I strongly disagree," interrupted Taurus, the chancellor, his ermine-fringed robes swaying as he leaned on a carved staff. "We've already offered what would beggar the kingdom. More gold only excites Ophir's greed. We act when the horde appears. If we lose, Koth will have Colossus. If we win, Ophir may release him for the ransom we can pay." "And meanwhile," Amalric growled, his lion-like yellow mane bristling, "soldiers desert daily, and the mercenaries grow restless. We must act swiftly, if at all." "Tomorrow we march southward," Yasmela declared, voice ringing through the chamber. She jerked aside the curtains dramatically, revealing Conan. The effect was unusual. Conan sat sprawled in his chair, feet propped on the ebony table, gnawing a beef bone like a predator. He glanced casually at the astounded nobles, grinned faintly at Amalric, and went on eating as if nothing had happened. "Mitra, protect us!" Amalric exclaimed. "That's Conan the Northron, the most turbulent of my rogues. I'd have hanged him long ago were he not the finest swordsman ever to wear a hauberk." "Your Highness jokes," Thespides barked, his aristocratic features darkening. "This man is a savage, no breeding, no culture. To place gentlemen under his command is—" Conan paused only long enough to glare at the pointy-nosed noble, blue eyes glinting like steel in the torchlight. Then, with a grunt of pure disinterest, he went back to gnawing the bone, leaving the nobles to sputter and fume at their new commander. "Count Thespides," Yasmela said, her dark voice steady, "you have my glove under your baldric. Return it, and then go." "Go?" hasped he, startled. "Go where?" "To Koth or to Hades," she replied coolly. "If you will not serve me as I command, you shall serve me not at all." "You wrong me, princess," he said, bowing low, his pride stung. "I would never forsake you. For your sake, I will even place my sword at the disposal of this savage." "And you, my lord Amalric?" she asked, turning to the lion man of a soldier. "I'll serve under him," he said, voice a low rumble. "A short life and a merry one, I say. And with Conan, the throat-slitter, in command, life will be both short and merry. Mitra help me. If this dog ever commanded more than a company of cutthroats, I'll eat him, harness and all." "And you, my Aga?" she asked, looking to Shupras. He shrugged. Tall, gaunt, and hawk-faced, the fatalism of his borderland Kothian ancestors was written in every line of his lean frame. "Ishtar gives, princess," he said simply.
"You wait here," she commanded. While Thespes fumed, gnawing his velvet cap, Taurus muttered wearily, and Amalric prowled the chamber like a caged lion. Yasmela disappeared behind the curtains. Her slaves swiftly obeyed her summons, bringing plate harness to replace Conan's chainmail, gorget, cuirass, pauldrons, jamboys, cuisses, and sallet. When she drew the curtains again, Conan stood clad in burnished steel. The visor lifted, dark face half-shadowed beneath the black plumes that nodded over his helmet, and even Thespes could not help but note the grim, commanding impression. Amalric's jest died on his lips. "By Mitra," he said, slowly, awe in his voice, "I never expected to see you cased in coat armor, yet you shame none who wore it before. By my finger bones, Conan, I've seen kings carry themselves less regally." Conan said nothing. A shadow flickered in his mind, a prophecy of things yet to come. In the years ahead, Amalric's words would echo back, sharp as a sword, when dream became reality. By the early haze of dawn, the streets of Khoraja thronged with the curious and the devoted. The army rolled from the southern gate at last. Knights gleamed in ornate plate armor, colored plumes snapping in the breeze above burnished sallets. Their steeds, richly acarpitioned in silk, lacquered leather and gold buckles, danced and pranced, showcasing their riders' skill. Lances rose like a forest of steel, pennons fluttering proudly. Each knight bore a token of love or loyalty, a glove, a scarf, a rose tied to helmet or self-delt. The chivalry of Khoraja, 500 strong, rode under Count Thespes, who men whispered secretly coveted Yasmela's hand. And in the midst of it all, silent and commanding, rode Conan, the wild Cimmerian, stranger to courtly flattery, yet a force no enemy would dare underestimate. The march had begun, and with it the fate of a kingdom.
Behind the knights came the light cavalry, sleek and rangy, their riders sharp-faced hillmen with spired steel caps glinting in the early sunlight. Chainmail clinked beneath flowing caftans, and their Shemitish bows, deadly at 500 paces, hung ready across their backs. 5,000 of them swept along under the watchful eye of Shupris, his lean, hawk-like face tense beneath the spired helmet. Next, the Khoraja spearmen trailed, a mere 500, the scions of ruined families, penniless youths and broken men who could not afford horses or plate. Though fewer in number, they carried the pride of ancient Gothic blood, standing firm beneath their banners. The mercenaries brought up the rear, a formidable 1,000 horsemen and 2,000 spearmen, their tall horses hard-bodied and savage. No curvets, no parades. Every motion was measured, businesslike, a testament to years of bloody campaigns. Chainmail covered them from head to foot. Visorless helms rode atop linked coifs. Shields were plain, lances bare of guidance, and at each saddlebow hung a steel axe or mace. At their sides, broadswords gleamed. These were men of every race, every crime. Hyperboreans, tall and heavy-boned, slow-spoken but violent. Tawny-haired gundermen of the northwestern hills, swaggering Corinthian mercenaries, bristly black-mustached Zingarians, and far western Aquilonians. All were Hyborians, save the Zingarians, united only by the lust for gold, battle, and survival. At the rear, a camel in lavish housings moved slowly, led by a knight on a massive warhorse, flanked by an elite cadre of royal house troops. Seated beneath the silken canopy, a slender, silk-clad figure drew every eye. The people of Khoraja, ever mindful of royalty, threw up their leather caps, cheering wildly. Conan of Cimmeria, uneasy in his gleaming plate, stared at the adorned camel, brow furrowed. "The princess rides with us," he said to Amalric, his voice low. "She's supple enough, but too soft for this work. Anyway, she'll need to shed those robes before she does anything." Amalric twisted his yellow mustache to hide a grin. Apparently, Conan assumed Yasmela intended to join the fighting, as barbarian women often did. "The women of the Hyborians don't fight like your Cimmerian women, Conan," he said, his voice lowering. "She rides only to observe the battle. Though, between you and me, I suspect the princess has her reasons. She fears something or someone. Conan's eyes narrowed beneath the black plumes of his helm. Whatever her fear, it would not slow him. Ahead lay the road to destiny, and the army of Khoraja, tamed, disciplined, and mercenary, was ready to follow the hand that led them. An uprising? Maybe we ought to hang a few citizens before we march. No, Amalric cut him off. One of her maids babbled of something that came into the palace by night. It scared Princess Yasmela half out of her wits. This is no mere flesh-and-blood enemy. It's Natok's devilry, I doubt not. Conan shrugged, calm as ever. War was his trade, life itself a series of battles since the moment of his birth. Death had been his constant companion, stalking him at his side, looming over dice games, rattling wine cups with bony fingers. It waited, ever patient, like a king's loyal cupbearer. One day it would claim him, but for now it mattered only that he lived through the present. Others, however, were less fearless. Conan paused as a slender figure in a dark cloak approached from the sentry lines. "Princess, you should be in your tent," he blocked her path. "I could not sleep," Yasmela admitted, her dark eyes haunted by the shadows of the firelight. "Conan, I am afraid. Are there men among the host you fear?" His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, steady and unyielding. "No man," she whispered, shivering. "Conan, is there anything you fear?" He tugged at his chin, considering. Finally, his voice was low, measured. "I," he said, "the curse of the gods."
Again she shuddered, her voice barely a whisper. "I am cursed. A fiend from the abyss has set his mark upon me. Night after night he lurks in the shadows, whispering dreadful secrets. He will drag me down to be his queen in hell. I dare not sleep. He will come to my pavilion as he came in the palace. Conan, you are strong. Stay with me. I am afraid." In that moment, she was no princess, only a frightened girl, stripped of her pride, unashamed in her vulnerability. The very power that had once terrified her now drew her near, compelling her. Conan responded with a simple, pragmatic gesture. He shrugged off his scarlet cloak and wrapped it around her, roughly, as though tenderness was beyond him. His iron hand rested briefly on her slender shoulder. She shivered again, not with fear this time, but with a surge of something electric, something primal. It was as if a fragment of his formidable vitality had passed into her, awakening a wild, instinctive energy deep within. "Lie here," he instructed, nodding toward a clean patch of earth near the small flickering fire. The sight of a princess lying on the bare ground beside a campfire, wrapped in a warrior's cloak, seemed to him perfectly natural. She obeyed without hesitation. Conan seated himself on a nearby boulder, broadsword resting across his knees. The firelight glinted from his blue steel armor, casting shadows that carved his features into something both terrifying and magnificent. He was a figure of raw power momentarily at rest, motionless yet alive with the potential for violent action at the instant it might be required. His presence was elemental. Not merely a wild man, he was the wild itself. His veins coursed with the blood of the wolf pack, his mind held the brooding depths of northern nights, and his heart blazed with the fury of untamed forests. Half dreaming, half meditating, Yasmela finally succumbed to sleep, wrapped in a strange, delicious sense of security. Somehow she knew that no flame-eyed shadow would approach her while this grim sentinel from the untamed lands stood guard. But dawn came, and with it a subtle stirring of unease. A low murmur of voices drew her eyes open. The fire had burned low, casting the camp in gray-gold light. Conan remained on the boulder, his blade reflecting the dim glow. Beside him crouched another figure, the dying embers outlining a sharply hooked nose, a glinting eye beneath a white turban. The man's voice moved rapidly in a Shemite dialect, intelligible to Yasmela, but the urgent cadence carried through the morning air. "Let Bel wither my arm, I speak the truth," the Shemite cried, his voice trembling with excitement and fear. "By Derketo, Conan, I am a prince of liars, but not to an old comrade. Swear by the days when we were thieves together in Zamora before you donned your hauberk. I saw Natok. I knelt with the others when he called upon Set, but I did not bow my head to the ground like the rest. I am a thief of Shumir, and my eyes are keener than a weasel's." I squinted up and saw his veil blowing in the wind. It blew aside, and I saw, by Bel, Conan, I saw. My blood froze in my veins. My hair stood on end. What I witnessed burned my soul like red-hot iron, and I could not rest until I verified it myself. I journeyed to the ruins of Kuthchemes. The ivory dome's door was open. There lay a great serpent, transfixed by a sword. Inside the dome lay a single corpse, shriveled and twisted. I could scarcely make it out at first. It was Shivatas, the Cimmerian, the only thief I ever acknowledged as my superior. The treasure lay untouched, shimmering in heaps about him. That was all. Conan opened his mouth to speak. There were bones. "There was nothing," the Shemite interrupted, passion flaring in his voice. "Nothing, only that one corpse." A heavy silence fell. Yasmela shrank, a crawling, nameless horror crawling along her spine. "Whence came Natok?" the Shemite whispered, his voice vibrating with awe and dread. "Out of the desert, on a night when the world was blind and mad clouds swept frenzied across the shuddering stars. The wind howled, mingled with the shrieks of spirits of the wastes. Vampires roamed, witches rode naked on the gale, werewolves howled across the wilderness. On a black camel he came, riding like the wind itself, unholy fire playing about him. The cleaven tracks of the beast glowed in darkness. When Natok dismounted before Set's shrine at the oasis of Afaka, the beast swept into the night and vanished. Yet the tribesmen swear gigantic wings rose up from that black camel, rushing upward into the clouds, leaving a trail of fire behind it. No man has seen it since, but a brutish man-like shadow shambles to Natok's tent, gibbering in the blackness before dawn. Conan, Natok is... Look, I will show you what I saw that day at Shushan, when the wind blew aside his veil. Yasmela's eyes widened as the Shemite revealed a small golden image in his hand. She saw Conan grunt in recognition, and then a cold darkness swept over her. Her knees buckled. For the first time in her life, Princess Yasmela fainted. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when the army surged forward once more. Tribesmen raced into camp, their mounts reeling from the long ride, to report the desert horde encamped at the well of Altaku. Through the hills the soldiers pushed, leaving the wagon trains to follow. Yasmela rode among them, her dark eyes haunted. The nameless horror of Natok had taken shape in her mind, solid, inevitable, and more terrible than she had imagined. The coin in the Shemite's hand from the night before had revealed the impossible, a visage long dead, forged by the secretive, degraded Zugite cult, yet alive in shadow and dread.
The sun rose pale and uneasy, as if the heavens themselves feared what was to come. The winding road threaded between jagged cliffs and gaunt crags, their shadowed faces rising like sentinels above narrow, stony valleys. Here and there villages clung to the hillsides, clusters of rough stone huts, plastered with mud, perched precariously as if afraid to fall. From these villages, tribesmen surged out, eager to join their kin in the host. By the time the army had threaded the hills, it had grown by some 3,000 fierce archers, their eyes bright with the thrill of war. Abruptly, the hills fell away, revealing a vast expanse stretching southward. The Kothian uplands ended here in a sheer wall of rock, beyond which the southern desert rolled away in barren emptiness.
Dusty, lifeless, and merciless, it stretched to the horizon, but hidden somewhere in that parched wasteland lay the well of Altaku and the dreaded horde of Natak. Below them lay the pass of Shamla, a corridor that had long carried the wealth and armies of Koth, Khoraja, Shem, Turan, and Stygia. The ramparts of the hills here were broken, forming promontories thrusting into the desert. Most of the valleys ended in rugged cliffs, all but one, the pass itself. It resembled a vast hand stretching from the uplands. Two broad ridges fanned outward like fingers, the outer sides sheer, the inner slopes steep and treacherous. The vale rose sharply as it narrowed, spilling onto a plateau flanked by gully-riven slopes. At its center was a well, surrounded by a cluster of stone towers, manned by the vigilant Zahimi clan. Conan swung from his horse, discarding the heavy plate armor for the familiar freedom of chainmail. Thespes reined in beside him, voice sharp. "Why do you halt?" "We wait here," Conan replied simply, scanning the expanse of the desert. "'Twere more knightly to ride out and meet them," snapped the Count. "They'd smother us with numbers. No water out there. We camp on the plateau." "My knights and I will camp in the valley," Thespes retorted angrily. "We are the vanguard, and at least we do not fear a ragged desert swarm." Conan merely shrugged as the nobleman led his glittering company down the slope into the valley. Amalric's yellow-maned figure halted, watching the descent with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "The fools," Conan muttered. "Their canteens will soon run dry. They'll have to ride back up to the well for water." "Let them be," he said. "It's hard for them to take orders from me. Tell the dog brothers to ease their harness and rest. The men have marched hard and fast. Water the horses, let them eat." No scouts were needed. The desert lay open, stark and bare, though the view was partially veiled by low-lying clouds drifting whitish across the southern horizon. Only a jumble of ruins broke the monotony, a tangle of stones miles into the desert, remnants of some ancient Stygian temple half buried in sand and shadow. Conan dismounted the archers and spread them along the ridges with the tribesmen, their keen eyes sweeping the wasteland. The mercenaries and Khoraji spearmen were stationed on the plateau around the well. Behind them, where the hill road emptied onto the plateau, Yasmela's pavilion had been pitched, a fragile jewel of silk and color amid the harsh geometry of rock and sand. The princess herself watching, eyes dark and haunted from the shadow of her tent. The stage was set. The desert waited, silent and merciless, as Khoraja's army prepared to face the coming storm. With no enemy in sight, the army relaxed, at least for the moment. Bassinets were doffed, coifs thrown back onto mailed shoulders, belts loosened. Rude jokes ricocheted along the ridges as fighting men gnawed on slabs of beef and plunged their mouths into jugs of frothing ale. Along the slopes, the hillmen made themselves at ease, nibbling dates and olives, their sharp eyes never fully resting. Amalric strode up to Conan, who sat bareheaded on a boulder, gazing towards the south. "Conan, have you heard what the tribesmen whisper about Natak?" he asked, voice low but tense. "By Mitra, it's too mad even to repeat. What do you make of it?" "Seeds rest in the ground for centuries without rotting sometimes, but surely Natak is a man." "I am not sure," Amalric grunted. "At any rate, you've arranged our lines as well as any seasoned general could. Nothing that beast or his devils do can take us unawares. Mitra, what a fog!" "I thought it was clouds at first," Conan said, squinting. "See how it rolls." What had seemed mere clouds was no gentle mist, but a thick, rolling veil, moving northward like a turbulent, unstable ocean. The desert vanished beneath it. The Stygian ruins disappeared. Men watched, dumbfounded. This was no natural phenomenon, no thing ever seen before. "No use sending scouts," Amalric muttered in disgust. They couldn't see a hand before their faces. The edges of this thing are already near the ridges. Soon it will mask the entire pass. Conan bent suddenly, pressing his ear to the earth. His dark eyes narrowed. Then he sprang to his feet, swearing in a voice that carried across the valley. Horses and chariots, thousands of them, the ground shakes beneath their tread. Ho there, burgonets and pikes, stand to your ranks. At that instant the mist vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. Not a slow lifting, but a sudden vanishing, like a flame snuffed by a wind. The sun blazed down on a desert no longer empty, but thronged with the living pageantry of war. A great shout rose from the enemy lines, echoing through the hills. At first glance, the watches seemed to behold a glittering sea of bronze and gold, where steel points sparkled like 1,000,000 stars. The invaders had halted, frozen in long serried ranks, their armor and plumes flaming in the sun. At the forefront were the chariots, drawn by great Stygian horses, snorting and pawing, flaring nostrils quivering. Each driver leaned back, bracing powerful legs, dusky arms knotted with corded muscle. Their riders were noble warriors, tall, hawk-faced, bronze-helmed, with crescents topped with golden balls. Heavy bows were in their hands, not mere archers, but seasoned hunters of lions and men alike. Conan's hand brushed the hilt of his sword. The earth seemed to hum beneath the pounding of hooves. The army was poised, waiting for the first clash, the desert awaiting the fire of steel, and the shadow of Natok creeping over all.
Behind these came a motley host of wild men riding half-wild horses, the warriors of Kush, the first of the great black kingdoms of the southern grasslands. Shining ebony, supple and lithe, they rode stark naked, without saddle or bridle, their lithe bodies a study in savage grace. Following them, a rolling tide of the desert sons, thousands upon thousands of the warlike Shemites. Horsemen in scale-mail corselets and cylindrical helmets, the Ashuri of Nippur, Shumir, and Erech, and their sister cities, rode in disciplined ranks. Beside them surged clans in flowing white robes, nomads of the wandering desert. The entire horde seemed to stretch endlessly, the sun glinting off steel and bronze as they moved in ominous undulations. Now the ranks began to shift and eddy. Chariots veered to the side, while the main host pressed forward with an uncanny deliberation. Down in the valley, the knights had mounted. Count Thespides, black-haired and gleaming in gold-threaded armor, thundered up the slope to Conan. He did not dismount, speaking sharply from his saddle. The lifting of the mist has confused them. Now's the time to charge. The Kushites have no bows and they mask the advance. A stripe of my knights will smash them into the Shemite ranks and shatter their formation. Follow me. One stroke and victory is ours. Conan shook his head slowly. Were this a natural foe, I would agree, but their confusion is feigned, like a lure to draw us into rashness. I fear a trap. Then you refuse to move? Thespides' face darkened with wrath. Be reasonable, Conan said, voice calm. We hold the high ground. Our advantage is absolute. With a furious oath, Thespides wheeled and galloped back down the slope to his impatient knights. Amalric shook his head. You should not have let him go, Conan. Look there. Conan's eyes narrowed and he sprang to his feet, swearing. Thespides had swept alongside his company, their armor catching the sun. 500 lances dipped in unison, the charge thundering down the valley like a living avalanche of steel and horseflesh. A young page came running from Yasmela's pavilion, breathless. My lord, the princess asks why you do not follow and support Count Thespides. Because I am not so great a fool as he, Conan growled, settling again on the boulder and gnawing a massive beef bone with deliberate calm. You grow sober with authority, Amalric murmured. Madness such as that was always your particular joy. Aye, when only my own life hung in the balance. Now, what in hell?
A sudden movement caught all eyes. From the extreme wing of the horde, a lone chariot charged, the naked charioteer thrashing his horses like a man possessed. Beside him floated a spectral figure in a robe that seemed to ripple unnaturally in the wind. Cradled in his arms was a great vessel of gold, from which poured a thin, glittering stream that sparkled like sunlight on flowing water. Across the desert's front, the chariot left a luminous trail in its wake, a phosphorescent line that shimmered on the sand like a serpent's track. "That's Natok," Amaric swore, his voice tight with fear. "What hellish seed is he sowing?" The warriors stiffened, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Conan's eyes blazed as he studied the eerie procession, feeling the familiar thrill of battle pulse through his veins, but now shadowed by a nameless cosmic terror. The charging knights thundered onward, heedless of the strange glittering lines stretching across the sands. 50 paces more, and they would crash into the uneven Kushite ranks, standing motionless, spears leveled like a forest of iron. But the foremost knights did not perceive the crawling menace. As hooves struck the line, a sound like steel on flint rang out, but far deadlier. In an instant, a white explosion tore through the desert, splitting the sands with a burst of searing flame. Horses and riders alike were engulfed, steel and flesh alike withering in the inferno like insects trapped in a sudden blaze. Rank after rank pressed forward, unable to halt their momentum. The rear ranks piled onto the charred bodies of their comrades, a writhing chaos of screaming men and mangled horses. The charge had become a nightmare of destruction, instantaneous and horrific. Now the illusion of disorder vanished. The horde fell into grim, precise lines. The wild Kushites surged into the wreckage, spearing the wounded, smashing helmets with stones and iron hammers. It happened so quickly that even the watchers on the hills could only gape in disbelief. A cry rose from the hills. "We fight not men, but devils!" Panic flared along the ridges. One hillman fled towards the plateau, froth dripping from his lips. "Flee! Flee! Who can face Natok's sorcery?" He bellowed. With a snarl, Conan leapt from his boulder, hefting a massive beef bone. The man fell, blood spurting from nose and mouth. He drew his sword, its blue steel glinting like fire. "Back to your posts," he roared. "Let another take a step backward and I'll shear off his head. Fight, damn you!" The rout froze as abruptly as it had erupted. Conan's presence was a dash of ice into the boiling terror of the men, sudden, unyielding, absolute authority. "Take your places," he barked, moving among the ranks. "Stand to it. Neither man nor devil comes up Shamla Pass this day." Along the plateau rim, the mercenaries braced their belts and gripped their spears. The lancers settled into their saddles behind them, while the Khoraja spearmen formed reserves to one side. To Yasmela, standing pale and motionless at her tent's entrance, the host seemed a fragile handful against the vast throng of desert warriors. Conan, among the spearmen, studied the advancing lines. He knew the invaders would not risk a chariot charge up the narrow pass, and he noticed the wild riders dismounting. With no supply trains, their canteens and pouches hung empty at their saddles. They drank the last of their water and discarded the vessels carelessly. "This is the death grip," he muttered, "is narrowing. Better a cavalry charge than wounded horses to ruin formations, but we'll see how this ends." He tightened his grip on the spear in his mailed hand, muscles coiled, eyes flashing, ready for the storm to come.
The horde had taken shape, a massive wedge, its tip the bronze-plumed Stygians, the body a wall of mail-clad Ashuri, flanked by the undulating masses of desert nomads. Shields lifted, spears bristling, they surged forward, unstoppable, while behind them a motionless chariot bore a tall figure, arms wide in a grim, silent invocation, as if drawing some unholy force from the sun-scorched earth itself. As the vast host entered the mouth of the valley, the hillmen loosed their arrows. Men fell by dozens, bodies thudding against sand and rock. The Stygians, helmets bent to the hail of shafts, strode forward relentlessly, dark eyes glaring over shield rims, trampling the fallen beneath them. Yet the Shemites returned fire, and the skies blackened with whirling clouds of shafts. Conan watched the onslaught, steel blue eyes narrowing. Some part of him knew this was no ordinary battle. Natok's hand was in it. Magic, terrible, precise, unseen, drove the horde onward, fearless of death, death to chaos. By sheer numbers alone, the arrows and boulders of the hillmen began to lose their sting. Panic flickered in the hearts of the archers as they loosed shafts madly, trapped wolves snapping at shadows, yet still the wedge pressed on, inexorable as a storm. Boulders thundered down the slopes, crushing men by the score. Still the wedge advanced, its edges melting away in a storm of death, yet the center surged forward like a living, relentless tide. Conan's mind ran swiftly over every possible defense, every strategy he could muster, but none would stop the crash to come. Gripping the shoulder of a Zahimi warrior, Conan's voice cut like steel. Is there any way for mounted men to reach the blind valley beyond the western ridge? The Zahimi nodded, voice trembling. Aye, a steep, perilous path, secret, eternally guarded, but no time for hesitation. Conan dragged him toward Amalric, perched astride his massive warhorse. Amalric, he barked, follow this man. He'll lead you down the gorges, ride into the outer valley, circle the end of the ridge, and strike the horde from the rear. Speak not, but move. I know it's madness, but we'll do all the harm we can before we die. Haste. Amalric's mustache bristled, a fierce grin splitting his weathered face. A moment later, the lancers plunged into the tangle of rocky gorges, ghost-like shadows racing along the cliffs. Conan sprinted back to the pikemen, sword in hand, breath ragged, blue eyes blazing. The sound of hooves and war cries echoed from the valley below. Ahead, death waited, irresistible and terrible, but so did the Cimmerian. He was not too soon. On the ridges, Shupras's hillmen, maddened by fear and desperation, rained arrows down upon the enemy. Men fell like grass before the scythe, bodies dropping in the valley and along the slopes. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very stones, the bronze-plumed Stygians slammed into the mercenaries, a thunderous wall of men in steel. In that hurricane of thundering metal, lines twisted and swayed, steel biting steel. War-bred nobles clashed with hardened soldiers, shields splintering under the assault, spears thrusting in the gaps, blood spattering like crimson rain. Conan's gaze locked on the towering figure of Prince Kuthchemes across the chaos, but the press of men held him fast, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, grappling, slashing, gasping for breath. Behind the Stygians, the Ashuri surged in relentless waves, their voices a roar that merged with the clashing steel. On either ridge, nomads climbed the cliffs, their naked, sinewy forms meeting their mountain kin in hand-to-hand combat. All along the crests, the fight raged in blind ferocity, mad, foaming, and unrestrained. Wild-haired Kushites ran screaming into the melee, teeth bared, spears swinging. To Conan, the valley became a seething ocean of steel, rising and rolling from ridge to ridge. The fight was locked in a bloody stalemate. The hillmen held the heights, the mercenaries braced with pikes dug deep into the blood-soaked earth. Superior armor and position balanced the overwhelming numbers for a moment. But the advantage would not hold. Wave after wave surged forward, Ashuri filling the gaps in the Stygian ranks. Conan scanned for Amalric's lancers around the western ridge, but they were nowhere in sight. The pikemen began to reel, bending back under the relentless pressure. Hope, even of survival, vanished. With a roar, Conan abandoned caution, screaming orders to his trembling captains. He broke from the plateau and raced towards the Khoraja reserves, the taste of battle fire burning in his veins. Yasmela's pavilion was forgotten. Only the predator within him mattered now. The unthinking, ruthless will to strike before death claimed him. "This day you become knights," he shouted, voice hoarse and wild, sword high raised, dripping blood. "Mount and follow me to hell."
The hill steeds reared, confused by the unfamiliar clash of Gothic armor. Conan's laughter rose above the chaos, gusty and triumphant, as he led them towards the eastern ridge, steep and untamed. 500 footmen, pauper patricians, reckless sons, exiles, mounted on half-wild Shemite horses, charging an army down a slope no cavalry had ever dared. Over the battle-choked mouth of the pass they thundered, hooves pounding against rock and corpses alike. A few lost footing, tumbling beneath the hooves of comrades, screaming as the slope claimed them. But the charge could not be stopped. Down the ridge, into the massed ranks below, they hurtled like an avalanche ripping through a forest of saplings. Men screamed, arms flailing, as Conan's host tore through the enemy lines, leaving nothing but a crushed, writhing carpet of dead in their wake.
And then, as the horde writhed and twisted upon itself, Amalric's lancers emerged from the labyrinthine gorges of the western ridge. They had cut through a cordon of horsemen in the outer valley, and now swept down like a steel-tipped wedge, cleaving the enemy from behind. Panic struck the desert fighters like a thunderbolt. Believing themselves flanked by an overwhelming force, nomads and mail-clad warriors alike broke and stampeded, trampling comrades in their flight. The hillmen on the ridges struck with renewed fury, driving the terrified survivors down the slopes, while the mercenaries and Conan's pikemen, bracing against the blood-soaked ground, pressed the advantage in the valley mouth. Crimson waves lapped about their ankles as they surged forward, pushing against the wavering enemy ranks. The Stygians held their ground for a brief instant, but behind them the Achery crumbled. Over the bodies of noble warriors fallen where they stood, the mercenaries rolled like a tide, rending the enemy line and shattering the horde's cohesion. On the cliffs, old Shupras lay dead, an arrow through his heart. Amalric, swearing like a pirate, writhed in pain, a spear driven through his mailed thigh. Of Conan's mounted infantry, barely 150 remained astride their horses, yet the enemy was broken. Nomads and armored spearmen alike fled in disarray, seeking their distant camp, only to be pursued by the hillmen who stabbed and cut them down mercilessly. Through the swirling crimson chaos, a terrible figure emerged, Prince Kuthchemes. Naked save for a blood-soaked loincloth, his dented crested helmet askew, limbs smeared with gore, he hurled the shattered hilt of his sword at Conan's face, then leaped, seizing the Cimmerian's rearing steed by the bridle. The Cimmerian was thrown off balance, the stallion rearing and crashing into the bloody sand below. Conan sprang clear, roaring as Kuthchemes lunged for him. What followed was a blur of steel, blood, and brutal strength. A stone in the prince's hand smashed against Conan's bassinet, sparks leaping with each blow, yet the Cimmerian struck back with dagger after dagger. The dark-skinned giant refused to fall, vitality seemingly inhuman, driving Conan to the edge of exhaustion. The world spun in the barbarian's vision, red and chaotic, until finally, with a convulsive shudder, the monstrous frame that had fought like a living storm went limp. Reeling upright, blood streaming from beneath his dented helmet, Conan blinked against the crimson chaos that sprawled before him. The valley was a nightmare of death, a red sea of bodies, each wave a tangled line of corpses choking the neck of the pass and littering the slopes. In the desert beyond, the remnants of Natok's horde fled for their lives, pursued by the weary survivors of Conan's army, but few remained to follow. Then a scream ripped through the air, raw and human, and yet carried a note of terror beyond mortal bounds. Up the valley, a chariot came hurtling, careening over the heap of fallen warriors as if they were mere obstacles in a game. No horses drew it. Instead, a monstrous black creature, camel-like yet hideously unnatural, propelled the chariot with a terrible speed. In its seat, Natok loomed, robes flaring like dark banners in the wind, and in his grasp writhed Yasmela, her cries piercing the roar of the desert. Beside him crouched a dark anthropomorphic figure, muscular and ape-like, lashing the reins with frenzied force. The chariot surged up the blood-slicked slope, heading straight for Yasmela's abandoned pavilion. Conan froze, horror-struck, as her scream tore through the air. Natok's long arm seized her, and before anyone could intervene, the chariot whirled and thundered down the valley, leaving a trail of dust and panic. No archer dared fire, no spear was thrown. Any miss would strike the princess in Natok's merciless grip. A guttural, inhuman yell burst from Conan's throat as he snatched up his fallen sword and lunged, but the forefeet of the black monster struck him like a battering ram, hurling him 20 feet through the sand, dazed and bruised. Yasmela's terrified cry echoed in his ears as the chariot roared past. Rebounding with a fury born of desperation, Conan seized the reins of a riderless horse racing past. Without slowing, he flung himself into the saddle, racing across the blood-soaked earth, over the scattered remnants of the Shemite camp. The desert stretched open before him, sunset painting the sands in lurid gold and crimson. Behind him, the chariot sped, a phantom of speed and malice. And then, at the ruins of an ancient Stygian temple, horror struck anew. With a shriek that froze Conan's blood, the chariot and its black steed changed form. Great wings unfurled from the creature, dark as midnight, and it rose into the sky, bearing Natok and the princess aloft. A shape of blinding, searing flame followed, within which a black man-like figure gibbered in ghastly triumph. The sight lasted but a heartbeat, yet it seared itself into Conan's mind, a nightmare rushing across the desert sky, an omen of darkness and death beyond imagining.
Natok sprang to his feet, his eyes flicking toward his relentless pursuer. Conan rode hard, sword swinging low, blood spattering the sand as he bore down. With a sudden, inhuman agility, the sorcerer seized the fainting princess and vanished into the ancient ruins. Conan leaped from his horse, plunging after them. The ruin glowed with an unholy light, though dusk pressed in around it. On a black jade altar lay Yasmela, her ivory skin gleaming in the eerie radiance. Her garments were scattered on the floor, torn away in brutal haste. Natok faced Conan, tall, lean, almost spectral, clad in shimmering green silk, his veil thrown back to reveal the face Conan had glimpsed on the cursed Zugite coin. "Aye, blench dog," hissed the sorcerer, his voice a serpent's whisper and roar combined. "I am Thrugrakotan. Long I lay in my tomb, waiting for this day. The arts that saved me from the barbarians also imprisoned me, but I knew one would come in time, one to fulfill destiny, and die as no man has died in 3,000 years. Fool! Do you think you've conquered because my people scatter, because my demon servant betrayed me? I am Thrugrakotan, master of the world. The desert is my army. The demons of earth obey me. The reptiles of the sands bow before my will. Lust for a woman weakened my power. Now the woman is mine, and feasting on her soul, I shall be unconquerable. Back, fool, you have not conquered me." He cast his staff at Conan, and it wriggled in the air, reshaping itself into a hooded cobra that reared, hissing. Conan recoiled, but with a furious strike he cleaved the serpent in half. The staff lay in 2 twisted black pieces at his feet. Thrugrakotan laughed, a hollow, terrible sound, and in his hand he gripped a black scorpion, more than a foot long, its lethal tail poised to strike.
Time slowed. Conan's mind snapped free from hesitation. He hurled his sword. The blade struck beneath Thrug Rakotan's heart, emerging a foot behind his shoulders. The sorcerer fell, crushing the poisonous scorpion in his grasp, his skull-like face frozen in a final grotesque grin. Conan strode to the altar, lifting Ysmela in his blood-stained arms. She clung to him, white arms wrapped convulsively around his neck, sobbing and shaking. "Crom's devil's girl," he grunted. "Loose me! 50,000 men have died today, and there is still work to do." "No!" she gasped, her grip fierce, unyielding. "I will not let you go. I am yours by fire and steel and blood. Back there I belonged to others, but here I am mine and yours. You shall not leave me." For a moment, Conan hesitated, the storm of battle and blood in his veins crashing against the raging desire in his soul. The unearthly glow of the chamber flickered across Thrug Rakotan's lifeless face, a mockery of mirth. Outside, across the desert, men still bled, kingdoms staggered, and death reigned. But here, in this crimson-lit chamber, all of that fell away, swept aside by the overwhelming tide of passion and relief. Conan crushed Ysmela to his iron chest, the slim white figure trembling like a living flame, and for the first time that day, the barbarian allowed himself the fierce, terrible joy of victory and of love.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.